when I was 6, my teacher yelled at me. So since then, every time I encounter strangers, I behave a certain way, right? And
Mm.
now, with the help of this awareness that you create, you can quickly switch out of that once and for all, maybe in a single session.
Welcome to the Navia Hypnosis podcast, where we explore hypnosis as a powerful tool for mental health and well-being. Dive into its mysteries, hear success stories, and discover how to transform our lives.
Shalom. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. So great to be here, Brad, as usual.
Dude, we're back at it, diving in deeper. Excited, right? In the pre-show here, I was just saying there's like so many different questions to dig into. So many interesting areas to talk about in this. What were you just saying? Like, say that little snippet about altered consciousness.
Yeah,
There's, like,
I was
some way
saying
that you're
that
referring to it.
the theme that I'm very fascinated by is this concept of personal growth through altered states of consciousness. And it encompasses both hypnosis, because that's what so much of hypnosis is. Technically, it would encompass maybe even meditation, right? There's a spectrum. And it could also encompass the whole world of psychedelics, which is thankfully getting more and more attention and awareness and popularity. And that includes things like MDMA and LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, which are being studied. Ketamine is becoming increasingly popular. So there's a whole range of it, and I'm fascinated by it all. I've experimented with it all. And obviously, my emphasis is hypnosis, because I think it's a real... I always say, this is like my go-to line, is hypnosis is the closest thing to drugs without doing drugs. And so if I can provide people, we'll talk more about drugs, I think, in the future, but if I could provide people with an experience that gets them as close to psychedelics without actually ingesting anything, then how powerful and useful a resource is that for times, when the psychedelics might not be available, when you're able to do a lot shorter session, when people might be afraid or not ready for any sort of substances. So there's a lot of power, I feel, in hypnosis, and people will have these visceral reactions. They'll have these really unusual and strange experiences in their bodies and in their minds in hypnosis within, half an hour of starting. And so I'm like, wow, I'm looking at that from the side. I'm like, that looks like a drug trip.
Yeah, that's one of the really interesting things, actually, to dive into is what a first session looks like. Because, what you just mentioned there of altered states of consciousness in order to pursue personal growth, there is certainly an aspect of that of some people having a barrier, right? Like, I'm really just speaking for myself. When you're talking about an altered state of consciousness, it's not what you're used to. And so getting into that altered state of consciousness, it's interesting thinking about that on this spectrum of consciousness. And then somehow it's close to this area over that you can only access through drugs, right? And it's like, well, okay, there's an unknown territory for a lot of people in that area.
Yeah.
What does that look like? A first session, like, let's just start there.
Yeah.
Sort of a first session, but sort of talking about it from that angle that you're, focused on, of like altered states of consciousness. Like, if somebody, what do most people, when they're reaching out to you, are they ready for that altered state of consciousness? What's sort of that entry mode that many people are coming to you?
Right. When people come to me, they often come, one of the biggest themes that I find is they're stuck. And this might be similar to when people go to a therapist also. So there's this general stuckness. There's a part of their life that they're not happy with, that they would like to see differently. For some, it's a behavior that they're trying to change, like they want to quit smoking, they want to stop drinking so much alcohol, whether or not they're considered addicted or not. But sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes they've maybe felt depressed for a while. They feel pointlessness to their life. And that's still a flavor of stuckness as I see it. Some of them...
So usually it starts with like a concrete something, some obstacle or some stuckness that they're trying to overcome.
This you'll hear this from therapists too. It is uncommon to find people who pursue therapy as a method of personal growth. There's usually a pain that drives people to that place. There's always more work that can be done, And sometimes people, once they get into it, they stay there. But the majority of people, especially if they're going to be spending money on this kind of thing, there has to be something that really incentivizes them. So there's usually some impetus. At times, at different points, people have been like, oh, I've been super curious, especially about hypnosis, and I wanted to give it a try. And those are oftentimes great clients. Just the curiosity is a good self-selector for somebody who's going to be a good fit. And speaking to that, some people have come through other things. Like they've already done therapy for years, and now they're like, oh, therapy didn't work for me. I want to do hypnosis, right? Or I know how therapy works in general, but for this issue, I feel like I need hypnosis, right? And some people just bypass it all. They just find me, and they've never done therapy before, but like hypnosis just fascinates them. So it's almost different personality types. Some people have to go through the mainstream to get there, and some people are, I guess, alternative enough or free-spirited enough, however you want to frame it, and they arrive at hypnosis right away.
Yes, but at some element, still sounds like there's a journey that people are going through, and then this element, as you refer to it, of being stuck in something, and then they show up, and like, what is that? Assuming it's somebody that's coming at it with no experience of hypnosis whatsoever. Right. What does that look like? Like, where is even the introduction process of, what does that look like?
So, and it's interesting, time and time again, a client after their first session will express surprise. Like they didn't expect that. It is different than they could possibly have imagined. And sometimes it's just pure different, and sometimes it's way better or more powerful than they thought. Those are both types of surprise that I find them expressing. And so when I'm doing these pre-calls and also doing my marketing, I'm trying constantly to convey to people how different this is, right? To try to get people prepared. But it is very difficult because you're describing like a drug chip, essentially. Again, you're describing an experience, and it's like trying to describe a flavor. And usually you describe a flavor by referring to another flavor or describing a color to a blind man. It's very, very experiential. So I do find myself challenged to really get people properly prepared. And some hypnotists, I've heard this advice, they'll recommend, for example, that the first session be more mild. So you'll do hypnosis, but you won't dive deep into the depth of the issue. You will rather do more what they call resource building stuff, where you come out feeling really good and feeling strong and powerful. And then the next session, maybe the second session, you dive deep. I currently don't do that. I'll dive right into the deep end with people immediately. And the question becomes like, is that the reason why a lot of people do it once and don't come back? So that's a bigger question. But for me, each session is remarkably similar to the one before. They all have a certain formula, a certain structure, and we just repeat that time after time. And you get this sort of consistent experience. Even if you're familiar with going to a therapist, you might know that even when you go to a therapist, you don't know what's going to come up each week, and it kind of varies, and they'll pull an idea out of their toolkit or something might come up. For us, it is very, very consistent, the entire procedure of what the session looks like. There are some differences, though. A client can get better at hypnosis with time, right? So most people have a very good session the very first time. There's very little that stands in their way of having a good session, but they'll have an even better one if it's their second or third, especially time. It becomes a learned skill, right? So you do see that gradual process.
Something I want to, so there's two things I think would be interesting to dive into a little bit more there, because you've mentioned it numerous different times, like resource building. And I sort of only have a vague idea what that is.
Yeah.
So maybe it'd be interesting diving in there, just because it has come up. But also you mentioned there's like getting the mechanics down. And one of the interesting points for me of helping express the mechanics of it, of the journey to people, is because I often find that when it's unknown, people can feel like it's overwhelming, right? Like, what are precisely the steps? How is it going to go?
Yeah.
And then when you just break it down, it becomes very practical, and people are like, oh, okay. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing scary here. And so maybe push off to the side that resource question for a second. That sounds like it's a little bit later in the journey, but it sounds like you go in to every encounter. There's like an introductory call conversation that happens? Is that where you start? And like, what are you covering there? What's your main
Yeah.
goal with that?
Yeah. So that's very true. A person's first interaction with me after the website or whatever they encounter me at will be a 20-minute or so intake phone call. And this is an opportunity for like a mutual assessment of, am I good for them? Are they a right fit for me? And there'll be a combination of, they'll talk about their issue. That's a big one. Like what brings you here today? And then I will try to address any questions they might have about hypnosis, or maybe even proactively address some misconceptions they might have or concerns. And I'll tell you two of the biggest ones that come up as far as concerns around hypnosis. The first one is this fear of hypnosis being mind control. There's a real fear of loss of control that comes with hypnosis because of its mystique. And that is perpetuated by the hypnosis being oftentimes people's first exposure to hypnosis comes from the world of stage hypnosis. They'll have been somewhere, they've been in Vegas, they've been in high school, and somebody comes in and gets on stage and makes people dance like chickens and do all sorts of crazy stuff. And they are afraid that I'm going to have that power over them. So there's this whole explaining process of what that stage hypnotist is actually doing, how he's really just reducing people's inhibitions. He's self-selecting the most suggestible and inclined to be on stage people from the entire crowd. And then they're collaborating with them.
Who are already ready to dance a little bit like a chicken.
Exactly. That's the key point. And then they collaborate and they really get into that mindset like a really good actor, right? Some people have that acting ability inside them and they really embody that role. And that role might be forget your own name, and part of them does, right? But that's still a role that they've chosen. So reassuring people that they're always in control. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. Whatever I say is going to pass through your own ears, into your mind. You'll decide if it fits you or not, and you're going to go with that or not. And that is hopefully reassuring to them. In general, getting a feel for my personality and who I am, and I tend to be very upfront, and that hopefully allows them to build some trust in me as well. And the other biggest concern people have is, can I be hypnotized? People will come with ADHD or focus issues, or they've tried meditating and it really didn't work for them. And so they're like, will it work on me? Because I'm so not the type that I would imagine myself it working on me. And more often than not, it works just fine. Oftentimes that concern, especially, I have a principle in life, the thing you're worried about won't come true. It's everything else that goes wrong. So if you're worried about that kind of thing, you're probably in the right direction. It's the people who are like either blasé about it that I might have sometimes more of a struggle. But you did refer to it before. There's a spectrum of consciousness. So with one client, I might be able to dive all the way deep and stuff like that. And with another client, that might be the topic of the session is, how can we get you more relaxed? Some hypnotists really get concerned with trance depth and measuring how deep from a scale of 1 to 100 or different metrics. I never concern myself with that. It's simply a matter of, are we relaxed enough to be doing the work that we need to be doing now? So very broad strokes.
What meditation? You mentioned that, and I know that's something that a lot of people that I've spoken with will say that sentiment that I tried meditation and it just wasn't for me, right?
Yeah.
Or it was really hard. I couldn't sit there, which I could see being, that makes sense that is a concern that people have, right? Is like, is this going to work for me? I tried meditation. It didn't work, right?
Right.
Do you see any correlation between that, or is there something, some aspect of hypnosis that you feel like will actually have an impact on people's meditative practice, or, do you see anything sort of like link up there? Cause
Right. Yeah.
Again, I've heard numerous people mention that to me about meditation where they just can't get into it. And you're saying, well, hypnosis, I mean, realistically, you haven't experienced those blockers, right? People can't get into it. People can't enter into the experience.
So I'll tell you, I actually have a lot of experience meditating. I've done like 10-day silent meditation retreats, and I've meditated a fair amount on my own. And there is a lot to, meditation is a learned skill. You do get better and better at it. But the classic meditation that people are thinking of is sort of sitting for a period of time and observing your own thoughts kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that is a very difficult thing to learn to do. There are other types of meditation, for example, that are a lot easier. For example, guided meditation recordings. And that's become very popular. Mm-hmm. Sam Harris. There's another very popular one that I'm suddenly blanking on, Mindspace, I think it's called, or something like that. I'm blanking on its name. That are meditation apps where you listen. That already becomes a lot easier because there's a stimulation of some kind. There's a stimuli going on throughout. So you're not staring into a void. You've got some sort of consistent guidance going on. So already, anybody who's curious about meditation, I invite them to start with something like that, with recordings. And in fact, I put out some of these on my own. And that's where the line really gets blurred between guided meditation recordings and guided hypnosis recordings. They can sometimes feel almost identical. It's maybe in meditation, it's not so much how relaxed you got, so much as you're spending this time focusing on some idea. And in hypnosis, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, is really, I want to get you down to a certain point first, and then we'll do what we do after. Because it's very important for me that you be in a hypnotic state as much as possible, as opposed to meditation might be a general relaxation. Now, again, it's going to be very blurred because a lot of hypnotic states simply requires you to be relaxed. So that's where the lines really kind of get blurred. But the benefit of doing hypnosis with a live person who's adapting to your needs and is creating a sort of energetic presence makes everything even easier than that. So even if you've struggled with meditation recordings, if I'm guiding you right now, and I'm going at your speed and I'm gauging your body language, and you know that there's a real human being there with you, you stay focused in some way, right? You're not spiraling off into some idea that because it's just a recording, there's another human being. And that makes the biggest difference of all is the presence of another person who hopefully has experience too.
That makes total sense. Just even being in that relationship, being in that moment with somebody, and sort of that it becomes a give and take sort of thing,
Exactly.
like vastly different than sitting there.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking that a lot of guided meditations, sometimes those can even happen in a group setting, right? But you don't really think about, or at least from my experience, it's very rare to sort of have one-on-one guided meditations.
Exactly.
Or most people are not going to experience that. Obviously it does exist. But it takes really devoted attention from also whoever's doing the guided meditation.
And you could do an experiment that somebody sits there and does a guided meditation for you, and you would already see a huge difference. Now, that person may not feel comfortable. This is one of the key skills of a hypnotist, is to feel comfortable, oftentimes ad-libbing, relaxing words at you, right? Where most people, even hypnotists starting out, they'll really stick to a script. And that script, you can really hear it in the voice. You can hear a scriptedness to it, and that doesn't work as well. So there's this ironic thing that once a person reaches a level of comfort, almost anybody could do this. And we'll talk about this more, I think, too, as far as maybe other therapists getting more into hypnosis. But at its basic level, somebody who's comfortable relaxing you can take you a really long way, and they don't need to be a certified hypnotist, right? They could just be a person who's got that specific skill set down.
So talk about that word you just used. So there's been a couple of words you've used that I find really interesting. Going deep is one that I heard a moment ago. And then also a long way. You can go a long way, right? And I always find these words so fascinating when we're talking about altering our states of consciousness, right? Because you're just sitting there in a chair, right? Or I guess that's a good question. Practically speaking, how do you do it? You sort of are people lounging on a couch? How do you sort of help people even physically position themselves to sort of be ready for the practice? What does that look like?
So when people are setting themselves up, there's really a range there too. I've had people sitting in like office chairs, and it works totally fine. I do like for people to get a little bit more relaxed. So think like sitting in an easy chair, or a very common one is to be propped up in your bed. So you've got like a pile of pillows behind you. So you're kind of 45 degrees against the headboard. You're not completely flat on your back. It makes it harder for me to see you when I'm looking at you through like a webcam or a video screen. So and you might be more inclined, for example, to fall asleep, which is okay, but not what we're aiming for at the basics of it. So really comfy in bed is a very common one that I invite clients to do, because the entire process of what we're doing, and this is like, if I had a tagline, I would say, this is all, for a while, this was my tagline. It was, it was basically personal growth through deep relaxation. Like we're used to
Mm.
thinking about growth as being hard and a struggle and being something that you really need to fight for and willpower. And did you try again? All that stuff. And one of the biggest things that I aim to change for clients right away, you can go further, again, that word, in life and in your personal growth by actually relaxing, by doing less and just calming down. Relaxation is going to actually be your key to do it. And it can be effortless. So much of your work can be effortless. That doesn't mean painless. I've actually written a blog post about this. It might be a lot of pain that comes up, a lot of discomfort, but at the same time, your body is almost like not doing it. You're entering a state of not doing, and a lot of pain can arise in that place because you're giving space to something that didn't have space before. But it can be extremely conducive and a huge lesson to see how far you can go in your own mind and insights and change by actually learning to relax. So I'll describe to you like a typical flow. So a client gets super comfortable in, let's say, their bed, right? And we'll spend about the first 10 minutes or so of the session doing a progressive muscle relaxation. This is a fairly in-depth way of getting somebody into trance or into hypnosis. And we'll do that especially in the beginning because people might not know exactly how to relax. So we'll really go like limb by limb in the body and focus on relaxing it. So relax the muscles on your eyelids, relax the muscles around your ears, relax your shoulders, relax your toes. We'll literally go through the whole body like that. Once the body's relaxed, we then go on to relaxing the mind. There's a few prompts for relaxing the mind, but it's a lot easier to relax your mind once your body has actually relaxed. Our mind looks to our body for physical cues, physiological cues of how are we doing right now? And when it sees that the body's relaxed, the heart rate is slowed down, the breathing is slowed down, your mind is able to slow down as well. And those thoughts, racing thoughts, your thoughts will slow down. So that's literally the order we take. A side anecdote, which I love to illustrate this, they injected people with adrenaline, right? And artificially simulated aroused state of like a beating heart and stuff like that. And people's thoughts start racing, right? So that's an example of how we see this work one way. We could also proactively take it the other.
Which I think, if I can hop in here, like that aspect is, for me, the very first time anybody mentioned that to me, that the physical activity you do clearly has an impact on what's going on inside you as well.
Yeah.
For me, for 20, nearly 30 years of my life, that thought, the connection there had not occurred to me.
Okay.
Right. And where you can very much enliven yourself, right? Give yourself energy by hopping up and down, right? Like, listen, this is what you see athletes doing, like it's all getting into. And then what you're saying is, by the same token, one of the ways that we help start getting ourselves prepared for consciousness is like not in this excited state where you see like an athlete or a fighter getting hyped up, but like, no, the same thing happens in the state of moving into relaxation is what I'm hearing.
Right.
And like, so that's actually where you start, is like how to have the body so that ultimately, but it sounds like what you're aiming for, like that's just the first step in the journey.
Exactly.
So that you can sort of get to relaxing the mind.
Exactly. I mean, both a couple things come up for there. You do want the body to relax because actually a lot of trauma, for example, does get stored in the body. So people's emotional world, is actually I'll talk about how we do our work, but it's very much body oriented. So people's anxiety in their stomach and in their chest, and sadness is in their heart and things like that. So there really is a body connection. And so let's, for example, imagine, we're jumping ahead a bit, but let's say a difficult memory starts coming up. The body will instinctively start clenching up. Your stomach will do what it's been doing for 30 years and clench up because that's the instinct that it has towards this. So if we have already taught ourselves to relax, as that memory comes up, we're training to have a different response to the same stimuli. That's a huge lesson for ourselves to be learned there. Wow.
A different response. A different response to the same stimuli.
Yeah.
That goes back to this thing of like, okay, I'm coming in stuck, and like, there's something there you're calling out that seems like really important, of like, you're changing the relationship
Exactly.
Am I hearing that right?
There's a very unconscious, in a way, this then that behavior that we go through our lives typically, right? When I was 6, my teacher yelled at me. So since then, every time I encounter strangers, I behave a certain way, right? And now, with the help of this awareness that you create, you can quickly switch out of that once and for all, maybe in a single session. You realize what's going on, right? And then you also teach yourself to behave differently. And that involves your body, feeling the physiology of being able to relax, even though, yes, this person might potentially yell at you. And also other factors like the awareness that you now have as an adult instead of as a child. So your additional awareness and knowledge and imagination all comes to play in creating this change.
Interesting. Okay. But before you get there,
Yeah.
it's like there's the relaxation phase. What is coming after, in that step? So again, sorry, I'm the one here getting you off on tangents.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like
No,
going
it's
back
super
to the
interesting.
mechanics of it, you do the muscle by muscle or
Progressive muscle
body
relaxation.
part by part.
Yeah.
Progressive relaxation. And then what's the next step from there?
Yeah. And I'll just, before I go to the next step, you might find it interesting, some of the symptoms or signs that somebody is in trance. And I start seeing those as we get through those first 10 minutes or so. And one of the common signs, for example, is rapid eye movement. So you'll see people, especially when they're asked to imagine things, their eyes will start moving behind the eyelids, like they're literally as if they're in a dream state, right? We see people's eyes behaving that way when they're dreaming, but here they're fully awake and are still doing that. People's eyelids will flutter. You could generally see a dropping down. Somebody, they were like this, they were heightened, they were ready for some sort of fight, them versus the world, and now they're able to sort of settle down. Their language, when they do talk to me, is slower and more contemplative, almost like they're talking from a dream state. So there's these cues that I look for, and oftentimes, if I don't see them, I might spend a few more minutes relaxing someone further, and that's where that feedback is so important, right? Where I can see.
Are they speaking to, like, how is it a conversation? Nearly, like you were just mentioning, people talking, responding back to you, and you're using that as a sign. And so there's like the back and forth.
Yeah,
between you, right?
That's primarily the third stage. So I know I'm getting a bit out of order here, but yes, there is talking to me throughout, and it's perfectly possible to be in trance, shift your weight around, move, get comfortable, go up to the bathroom and come back, okay, and still just come right back into trance and talk to me also. There may be levels of trance that there's conscious thought requires some amount of like left brain kind of thing, but it's still enough to do a lot of great work. And it helps guide and the experience and sometimes let things out. So we'll talk more about that. So the next stage, once they're relaxed, is what we call resource building, right? And it doesn't have to be long. That's sometimes a few minutes. But what it is we'll proactively get the client in a good place. And what that is done by typically connecting to an empowering state of being, where you feel happy or relaxed or confident, whatever it might be. Some of it's circumstantial, some of it is kind of geared by me towards specific things for the clients. And there's different ways of getting there. A common one is called anchoring, where I have you go back in time to a time in your life when you were really happy or really successful or confident. So you'd be surprised at how easy it is for people to just connect to a specific memory, that time when they graduated, that time they were sitting on their grandfather's lap, and just they're there and they start feeling it, and they start feeling it really well. And that already, again, is a very powerful lesson for people. You can switch how you're feeling like that. You walked in here and you're feeling really down on yourself, and 15 minutes in, and you're feeling confident. At this moment in time, in your body, you're feeling confidence because of it. So that is huge for people to learn, that they can shift their emotions through their imagination and through thinking and imagining certain things, and again, through relaxing their body. The reason we do this is because we're about to embark on a journey of a lot of stuff might come up, right? And it's essentially one big problem-solving mission, right? You've got a problem. That's why you're here. You're not where you want to be. If you were exactly where you want to be, you wouldn't be seeing me, right? And so we're going to use your creativity to get you where you want to be. Now, if you know anything about creativity, the best place to be creative from, right, and resilient from, is from a place of feeling good about yourself. right? Relaxed, yes, and also feeling confident, feeling loved, and feeling safe, whatever it is for you. So if we spend just a few more minutes in the beginning, getting you up to that level of like feeling really good, you can go that much further and even dive into like darker demons or deeper places kind of thing, right? Where you normally might feel unsafe doing so, right? But if I show you that you have this safe space that you can create for yourself and go there, and now we're going to venture out of that safe space and go hunting dragons in your mind, but you know where you started from. You have like a home base. And sometimes we use that. If you get overwhelmed, we know we can always go back. And sometimes just knowing that you could go back in the middle. We're going to cut this now. Things just got too intense. Go back to our safe space, relax there for a few minutes, go back out again, right? So having a home base emotionally to return to is so important.
Fascinating. Okay. So, and then all of this is happening by you guiding it through telling, right? You're telling the person what, like when you're trying to find that, that safe place, right? Doing the resource building are you just prompting them of, do you sort of have like common, I don't know, patterns of what you've encountered? You've said, okay, listen, this has been successful for other people. And you're prompting them of, here's the different things to look for, right? For that memory, for that experience that you had. You're providing the framework of like helping them find that. Do you find that, is that like, you said that takes a couple of minutes. How long is that usually? Like what's people struggle with that usually? Do they run into challenges with the resource building?
So this could be a fascinating jump off point to where we talk about the third stage, which is the work. But if we talk about just that point, two things come to my mind. The first is that I feel like it's my job, basically. I've got a list of possible resources that I could take people down, different roads. And I'm using my judgment and intuition, sometimes on the fly, as which I think would be best for the client based on the presenting issue, the work I've done with them in the past, all of that. That's where my judgment comes in. But the actual experience there, I try to keep it very vague and very broad, so it's mostly theirs. And this is what sets me apart even from other hypnosis modalities. Some hypnotists will get more opinionated. They'll get more guided. They'll say, I would like you to imagine yourself going into a garden right now, and that garden has beautiful trees and flowers, right? Sounds great. But your preference might be mountains and rivers. Mm-hmm. And so I actually use very, very broad language. I let the client create it, and I'll actually have them oftentimes let me know, what did you create? Where are you now? So I'll then help them make it more vivid, make it more nuanced, but I first let them create the world, and then I will help them immerse more deeply in it. So it's subtle, but it does start, that's where you start to see this divergence between what I call hypnosis-assisted healing, which is very, very much the client creating their own experience with me as the substance or the guide or the container, as opposed to other hypnotists who get more involved in there. They start doing things, start pulling levers and stuff like that. And I shy away from that overall.
Which is to say that there are different flavors.
100%.
There's different approaches to this. Do you find that people, like, it sounds like your flavor is a very, one, it's relationship based, right? Like you're feeding, there's a give and take happening between you and the person you're working with. It also sounds like you are driving yours. There's a lot of intuition. You are drawing from your tool set, but it sounds like while some people may pursue it in a formulaic fashion in some sense, it sounds like you see the importance of driving it through intuition, and meaning your own intuition.
Right.
Is that,
yeah.
Do you think, is that sort of the way you
so it
differentiate some of the different flavors?
Exactly. So a couple things that come up from that is I just trained a group of 8 therapists across the United States and Canada. And I was able to train them very quickly in this modality. And what I found is what it was essentially, there is a formula to what I'm doing. Like I said before, every session kind of looks the same. So there's a structure that we create, but in that structure is a ton of room for the practitioners, the hypnotist or the therapist's own intuition of what do I do. So I've given people, like, it's like a choose your own adventure with like 6 options for the inductions and 6 options for the resource building, and then the work looks like a certain thing, but there's still, you got to use your own judgment as to when you do it and which one you choose. There's still a lot of room for people to be to check in for themselves, and that's what really makes for a quality experience. And that speaks to your first point. Unfortunately, a lot of hypnotists are highly scripted. There's a lot of scripts out there that they can just read from, and there's a lot of formulas that they can just follow. And it takes a higher level of skill and self-trust and ability to kind of fly by the seat of your pants almost to create that experience for clients that's highly customized. I unfortunately had the experience of going to a local hypnotist center that basically was just recordings and then scripts being read to me, and I didn't say a single thing the entire time. So they didn't get any feedback from me. They were feeding me a certain thing. And maybe that will work, right? Because maybe it's useful and positive, but it's not the level of customization that I want to see. Because I can tell you for a fact, it's gauging where the person's at, rolling with it and modifying it. And that's what creates that really immersive experience. Clients are oftentimes getting stuck at different points. And if I can then help them get unstuck and then move that much deeper, right, they can have that breakthrough that we could have easily plateaued on that level before.
Yeah. We're going to leave a couple of cliffhangers.
Oh, wow.
Today,
That's a big one.
It's interesting because, what came to mind when you were just saying that is the overly scripted approach nearly can feel like following Google Maps, but Google Maps, like imagine Google Maps, you're driving somewhere and it breaks every single time you want to like get off and get a coffee,
Right.
or stop and get gas.
Or there's a traffic jam or the road's literally blocked and it just tells you that that's the way to go. It just, this is how you
that's
gotta
the way
go.
to go. Keep going, keep going.
I've had that.
Yeah.
You got to proactively find the detour. So exactly, for to have somebody who can roll with you, that makes all the difference.
Yeah. So here's the cliffhangers that we're going to continue on in the future is what those subsequent steps, because I love the analogy of, or just the reality of this journey, right? And it's like a long trip that's happening. You're not moving, but you're moving so much inside.
Yeah.
Right. The journey, like what are the steps of the journey, right? We've gone through a couple of the different phases, but then also touching on, we're sort of seeing these two parallel paths that we're sort of investigating right now. Like what is the inner experience going on with the person you're working with, but also what is the therapist experience, right?
Yeah.
Like what are the therapists? You're just mentioning, training other therapists, right? And I know that is one thing that many therapists are very interested in.
Yeah.
How can I bring hypnosis into my practice? What does that look like? Even just the mechanics of that aspect, the training and all that stuff.
Exactly.
So I think that gives us, a bunch of stuff to continue digging into.
Yeah. I'll give you one last soundbite. I'll give you one last
Yes.
soundbite that jumps off of this. And it ties, I think, some of what we were saying together. That so far what we described, the induction and the resource building, that part, that is almost universal across all of hypnosis. What happens next, stay tuned, is what makes hypnosis-assisted healing particularly powerful. But if most hypnotists are already using this and then giving it their spin, and in most therapists, I believe, if they took what I just described today, which is quite simple and easy to learn, applied it, and then did their own style of therapy, whatever it might be, okay, whatever you've learned and gravitated towards afterwards while the client's in a state of trance, you would get things that much more powerful, okay? So I've got my flavor that I jump off to, and I think it's amazing, but this is where I would love to see people taking even what I described today, doing it with their clients, and then having a regular therapy session after that, and it could be completely transformative.
That sounds powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll dive deeper next time
Absolutely.
into that. Thank you, Shalom, again for this journey that we're on, and we'll continue in the future.
Thank you, Brad.
All right. Thank you.